They laughed the moment the lawyer said her name, and that was the moment everything changed. 71-year-old Margaret Dawson sat quietly in a polished office as her late husband's will was read, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm but heavy with something deeper than grief. After 40 years of marriage, she expected memories, maybe dignity, certainly not humiliation. One by one, the assets were announced. The lake house to his son, the rental properties to his daughter, the investments divided neatly among them. Then came her turn, a broken trailer, and a single box inside it. A quiet ripple of laughter spread across the room, quickly masked but impossible to ignore. Margaret didn't react, but inside, something shifted. Not anger, something sharper. For decades, she had stood beside her husband, through lean years and long nights, believing they were building a life together. Yet now, it felt as if she had been erased from that story entirely. As the room emptied and the others moved on to discuss their newfound wealth, Margaret remained seated, staring at the small metal key placed in front of her. It felt heavier than it should have, cold and final. 40 years, reduced to this. But deep down, something didn't make sense. Her husband had never been careless, never random. And as she closed her hand around that key, one quiet thought began to rise above the humiliation. This wasn't the end of the story. For days, Margaret Dawson couldn't shake the feeling that something about it all was wrong. It wasn't just the humiliation of being left with a broken trailer while everyone else walked away with a lifetime of wealth. It was the quiet certainty that her husband had never done anything without purpose. He had been a careful man, deliberate in every decision. So why would he leave her with something that meant nothing? That question stayed with her, growing sharper with each passing hour until confusion slowly turned into resolve. If he had chosen this for her, then it wasn't random. It was intentional. The next morning, Margaret picked up the key and drove out to the trailer listed in the will. The road stretched far beyond the familiar parts of town, leading her into a quiet, forgotten stretch of land where time seemed to stand still. When she finally found it, the trailer looked exactly as everyone had imagined. Old, tilted, and nearly abandoned, its paint peeling under years of neglect. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe they were right. Maybe this was all there was, but something inside her refused to believe that. She stepped forward, climbed the creaking steps, and unlocked the door. Inside, there was almost nothing, just dust, silence, and a small wooden box sitting alone on a narrow table. No explanation, no message, just the box. Margaret walked toward it slowly, her breath steady but her hands slightly trembling. This was it, the thing no one else had cared enough to look at. And as she reached out and lifted the lid, one quiet truth settled in her mind. If everyone else had dismissed this, then maybe this was exactly where the real story began. Inside the box, there was no money, no jewelry, nothing that would impress the people who had laughed at her. But to Margaret Dawson, it didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. Carefully folded inside was a sheet of paper covered in numbers, written in her husband's familiar, steady handwriting. Coordinates, line after line of them. At the bottom, a single sentence stopped her cold. "You were the only one I trusted to understand." Margaret read it twice, her brow tightening. This wasn't like him. He had always been direct, practical, never cryptic. And yet here he was, leaving her with a puzzle instead of answers. Beneath the paper lay a small metal key, heavier than it looked, with 3 engraved letters on the tag, SBH. She turned it over in her fingers, the weight of it sinking deeper than the metal itself. Around her, the trailer remained silent, unchanged. Dust, broken furniture, nothing else to explain what she was holding. For a brief moment, doubt returned. Maybe this was meaningless after all. Maybe she was searching for something that wasn't there. But then she remembered the man she had lived beside for 4 decades. He had never done anything without reason. Not once. Slowly, the confusion inside her began to shift into something steadier. Determination. If he had trusted her to understand, then she wouldn't walk away without trying. Margaret folded the paper, slipped the key into her pocket, and stepped back out into the quiet afternoon. Whatever this was, wherever it led, she knew one thing for certain now. This wasn't an ending. It was a beginning she was meant to follow. The next morning, Margaret Dawson followed the coordinates without hesitation, her mind steady with a quiet sense of purpose. The drive took her far beyond the familiar roads of her town, past stretches of empty highway and industrial buildings she had never noticed before. It felt strange, like stepping into a part of her husband's life she had never been invited to see. When she finally arrived, one name stopped her completely: Silver Bay Holdings. Her hand tightened around the key in her pocket. SBH. For a moment, she just sat there, the engine still running, her heart beating faster as everything began to connect. This wasn't random. It never had been. Inside, the building was quiet, almost too quiet. A man at the front desk looked up with a polite but guarded expression. Margaret placed the paper and key in front of him, her voice calm but firm as she said her husband's name. Something shifted immediately. The man checked his system, then nodded slowly. This unit has been under restricted access for over 20 years. 20 years. The words echoed in her mind as she followed him down a long corridor to a numbered storage unit. When she stood in front of it, a strange weight settled over her. Whatever her husband had hidden, whatever he had never told her, was behind this door. Taking a steady breath, Margaret unlocked it. The metal door rolled open with a low, hollow sound. At first glance, it didn't seem extraordinary, but as her eyes adjusted, she realized this wasn't clutter. It was organized, intentional. And for the first time, she understood. This was never about what she had been given. It was about what she was about to discover. At first, Margaret Dawson didn't move. She simply stood there, letting her eyes adjust to what she was seeing. Filing cabinets lined the walls, each one locked. Crates were stacked neatly in the corners, labeled with dates and codes. Maps lay spread across a table, their edges worn as if they had been studied over and over again. This wasn't storage. It was a system. Her breath caught as she opened the nearest cabinet. Inside were documents, property records, contracts, financial statements, all in her husband's name. The dates stretched back years, to times she remembered clearly. Times when he had told her money was tight, when they had cut back, when she believed they were just getting by. But that hadn't been the truth. Page after page, the evidence unfolded. Quiet investments, hidden partnerships, carefully built assets that no one else had ever known about. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as the realization settled in. For decades, he had been building something in silence, something he had never explained, never revealed. Her eyes slowly moved across the room until they landed on a large steel safe at the back. It stood there, untouched, as if everything in the room had been leading to it. A strange calm came over her. Whatever answers she had been searching for, they were inside that safe. Margaret reached into her pocket, pulled out the key, and stepped forward. The key turned more smoothly than Margaret Dawson expected, the soft click echoing through the quiet storage unit like a final answer waiting to be heard. For a moment, she didn't open it. Her hand rested on the handle as if part of her wasn't ready for what came next. But she had come too far to stop now. Slowly, she pulled the door open. Inside, there was no pile of cash, no glittering valuables, just a neatly arranged stack of documents and a single envelope placed carefully on top. Her name was written across it in her husband's unmistakable handwriting. Margaret picked it up, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it. The moment she began to read, everything shifted. Margaret, if you're reading this, it means you didn't walk away. Her chest tightened. I know what the will looked like. I know what it must have felt like. But I needed them to believe there was nothing left for you. Because if they knew the truth, they would have taken everything before you had time to think. Margaret lowered the letter for a moment, her eyes filling as the pieces finally began to fall into place. This wasn't neglect. This wasn't betrayal. This was protection. She looked around the room again, the documents, the hidden life he had built in silence, and then back at the letter. The trailer wasn't your inheritance, it was the door. A quiet breath escaped her lips as the truth settled in. He hadn't left her with nothing. He had trusted her with everything. Weeks later, everything had changed, but not in the way anyone expected. Margaret Dawson moved quietly, methodically, working through the documents her husband had left behind. Every transfer was completed, every account secured, every asset placed firmly under her name. There was no rush, no drama, just careful decisions made with a calm clarity she hadn't felt in years. What had once looked like nothing had become everything. It didn't take long for the others to notice. When the accounts they expected to access weren't there, when the properties they believed were theirs didn't exist the way they thought, confusion quickly turned into urgency, then frustration, then anger. They came looking for answers. Standing in front of Margaret now, their confidence gone, they demanded explanations she no longer felt the need to give. She listened quietly, letting their words fill the space before fading into silence. Then she spoke, softly, but with a certainty that stopped them where they stood. You thought he left me nothing. She paused, just long enough for the truth to settle. He just made sure you saw it that way. There was no anger in her voice, no need for it, because in that moment, she understood something they didn't. The real inheritance had never been what was visible. It was what required patience, trust, and the willingness to look deeper when everyone else walked away. And that was something they had already missed.